Hello everyone. So this is a video on some theory that I've been working on since around the time that I started drawing connections between the landscape of Ireland and the Taoist Neijing to an alchemical painting. And that was in 2016, and that was the year that I visited Ireland. And when I came back, I realized I had done the microcosmic orbit of Ireland. And last year was when I finally started putting that research together as a finished product, which is this book series called Return to the Garden of Eden. And at that time, I was a practicing clinician doing acupuncture, and I was looking at amino acid charts one day, and I was also looking at Ogham, the Irish tree language, tree alphabet, and what I saw was two systems that seemed to have correspondences. So since then I've been pondering the Ogham tree language structure and function, and I have a curiosity that this Ogham tree language is in fact a reflection, an archetypal reflection of the amino acids which are the building blocks for making DNA. This all came about because in 2012 I read an article, and it kind of just sat in the back of my mind, and I think it contributed into the cross correlations that I've made with Ogham possibly being some kind of DNA mantra chanting system. In the article I read, it was actually a summarized article because the original research was written in German, and it was research that was done by some Russian and German scientists from different fields of expertise. Some were geneticists, some were biologists, and some were linguists. And what they found is that the DNA, they're calling it the junk DNA, the 90% of DNA that is apparently not used in the body, they found through their research that this DNA follows the same rule as human language. And I'll just quote from the summarized article written by Grasna Fossar and Franz Bludorf. If you want to read that whole article, it's on my blog on anayasciencewitch.com. I've copied it into there. And the quote, "The Russian linguists found that the genetic code, especially in the apparently useless 90% of DNA, follows the same rules as all our human languages. To this end, they compared the rules of syntax, the way in which words are put together to form phrases and sentences, semantics, the study of meaning in language forms, and the basic rules of grammar. They found that the alkalines of our DNA follow a regular grammar and do have set rules just like our languages. So human languages did not appear coincidentally, but are a reflection of our inherent DNA." And the article goes on to say, "Esoteric and spiritual teachers have known for ages that our body is programmable by language, words, and thought. This has now been scientifically proven and explained. Of course, the frequency has to be correct, and this is why not everybody is equally successful or can do it with always the same strength. The individual person must work on the inner processes and maturity in order to establish a conscious communication with the DNA. The Russian researchers work on a method that is not dependent on these factors but will always work, provided one uses the correct frequency." So at the time that I read that article, it was 2012, I think it was, yes. So that means I was in my third year of a 4-year degree in Chinese medicine. And at the next year, actually in the 2013, this is when I was finishing off a lot of assignments, and I went down to my family lake house to finish off all my assignments in one big last minute, get them all done. And I was very, very strict with myself. All I did was work on my assignments, go for walks in nature, and have little breaks in between, and drink cups of tea by the lake looking at the water. And what I was also doing was I was practicing a mantra that I had learned in 2009, which was the Gayatri mantra that I learned when I was studying Ayurveda. And I was practicing this mantra pretty much 24/7 while I was working. So when I had my little tea breaks, I would go out to the lake and I would sit there and I would practice the mantra out loud. And when I was walking, I would practice it in my head. And it just became a repeating frequency. And one day I was sitting there drinking my tea, and as I chanted the mantra, my voice started to go up in pitch every time I did a new round of this mantra. And I let my voice carry itself in the direction it wanted to go, as it seemed to want to change frequency and pitch. And as I did this, and I went up in pitch, and then I went up in pitch, and then I went up in pitch, and I went up in pitch, and this just happened naturally. And then as I got to a certain resonance, you could say, something very interesting happened. I was sitting there with my tea, and everything I could see with my eyes, the lake, the sky, the trees, the birds, the grass, everything suddenly, like a curtain, got pulled back on reality, and everything turned into numbers, like the matrix, like code. And it was kind of like a clear, transparent overlay where I could see these numbers that made up all of this visual sensory information, and they were overlaid onto the lake, the grass, the trees, the birds, the nature. And I sat there with my mouth open like, oh. And I've never done the mantra again, because I guess I got my answer. And what is this Gayatri mantra about? It is basically asking creation to show you, us, the practitioner of the mantra, the secrets of the universe. And if you've not heard the mantra before, the way I learned it sounds like this. Om Bhuvasva Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. And then you repeat that. And so the general translation of this mantra is, O Divine Mother, may your pure divine light illuminate all realms, physical, mental, and spiritual, of our being. Please expel any darkness from our hearts and bestow upon us the true knowledge. And so if we put this into context of what I've just read out about the DNA being able to program language at the right pitch or frequency, this brings us all back into the structure and function of the Om language. And so then when we come back to inspect the work of Conor McDarry in the Bible and Irish Book, he's showing us that the Hebrew language has its root origin in Irish. So then we may suspect that Sanskrit also has its root in Irish too, because we have other examples aside from Om. We have the word she, which is spelled S-I-D-D-H-E, and in Irish it's talking about fairy mounds, or the fairy folk, or the fairy powers. And then in the Sanskrit terminology, the cities are basically supernatural metaphysical powers, so it has a very strong correspondence. So that's something to think about as well. And we all know that, you know, the Indian Hindu mantras are very, very powerful tools. And so if we're going to do a word-for-word translation of the Gayatri mantra, we have Om, which means the primeval sound, Bur, the human body, earth, physical realm existence, Burva, the vital energies, heaven consciousness, Sava, the soul, inner peace, spiritual realm, bliss, Tat is that, Savitur, Savitur, the sun, solar powers, Varinyam, to choose the best, adore, Bhargo, effulgence, self-luminous, divine light, Devasya, the divine radiant, Dimahi Dio, the intellect, Yo, which, Na, our of us, Prachodayat, illuminate, inspire. So with all that as a kind of a context, as a backstory for how I came to view the way that the Om glyph script looks in its just its general form, it has the 4 acme, or the 4 divisions, and then it has the extra parts, forgive my pronunciation, Falte, which is also meaning feather, or the fada. I'm still learning about this. I'm a bit of a beginner when it comes to Om. I've been spending time doing other things. But what I'm going to illustrate here is not my rudimentary knowledge of the alphabet part of the Om, but more in terms of these 4 groupings of the acme and the 5th section of the Falte, or the fada, the feather, and how they may relate to the amino acid groupings. So amino acids make proteins, and these proteins build our DNA, the RNA, and then that copies itself, and then that forms the DNA as the double helix. And the amino acids are made from chemical bases called nucleotides, and there's 4 nitrogen bases, these nucleotides, and they team up in pairs to build the RNA, which produces the DNA helix chain. And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, thymine, adenine, cytosine, and guanine. And the arrangement of these 4 provide instructions to make the RNA and to make the DNA. And these 4 base pair nucleotides, they have a certain pairing. So adenine and thymine are paired together, and cytosine and guanine are paired together, and that is remembered by a little rhyme: apples and trees, cars in the garage. So that's A and the T and the C and the G. And so if you do look up amino acid charts, you will see that there's a 5th one called uracil, and that is basically used, which gets switched out for thiamine. So when DNA has been formed, thiamine is used, but when RNA is formed, the nucleotide uracil is used. So it's essentially 5 elements inside the 4 which switch out when the RNA is copied or mirrored into the DNA. So when we inspect the amino acid chart, there's different presentations. So one is just showing that it is these 20, the general 20 that are needed to form the main proteins. There's a few extra ones as well, but we do require 20 integral ones. And so when we take that into consideration, that there are 20 amino acids that are born from 4 base pair nucleotide groups, we can then start comparing it to the Om, which is arranged in 4 groups with 5 stick glyphs on each of the 4 groups, which gives us the multiple of 20. And then if we've looked at Ogham before, we know that each of these 20 main Acme glyphs have correspondences with trees, and those trees are given an Irish name. And it got me thinking, if this theory is correct, then each of these amino acids would equate to one of those trees. And because those trees have been given an Irish word name, or those glyphs have been given a tree which is an Irish word name, which has a sound. Therefore, coming back to the Russian linguist experiment, if we tone the sound of the tree, does that activate an amino acid in the body, which then goes on to build proteins, which then goes on to build DNA? So coming back to how the amino acids work, there's these 4 base pairs, and the complete arrangement of those 4 makes a set of patterns, and the full set of patterns are called codons, and the 64 patterns or codons arrangements, and this is called the genetic code. And so how is that arranged? Each of the 4 base pair nucleotides is grouped in sets of 3, and when you mix up all the letters and you do them in all of the possible combinations grouped in sets of 3, and a group of 3 is called a codon, there are 64 possible outcomes of that arrangement. And this is very interesting because this is where it starts crossing back over with Chinese philosophy and the I Ching, because the I Ching is showing us the movement between yin and yang across 8 different energetics or archetypes. And these 8 archetypes are heaven, wind, water, mountain, earth, thunder, fire, and lake. So you can see it is all basically involving cosmologic and telluric interactions of these 8 by 8 movements, and the I Ching is basically meaning the book of changes. So it's showing us the rhythm of the cosmological and earthly cycles through this patterning of 8, which is the 8 directions. So it's the north, south, east, and west, and then the directions in between, the cross-quarter directions. For example, north, northeast, south, southwest, things like that. So you get 8 directions. And then if you want to relate another observance of this very fundamental DNA coding system, we can see it in the checkerboard. The chess checkerboard has 64 black and white tiles, and this is what is always used in Freemasonry symbolism. So it's showing us that all of these different esoteric societies and cultures regarded this 64 yin-yang black and white pattern as something very important. And what is it important about? It's important because it is showing us the program, the genetic code of the human. So if we go a bit more deeply back into the 4 base pair nucleotide amino acid 64 codon arrangements grouped in letters sets of 3, these different groupings, depending on their arrangement, go on to form the amino acids. For example, if we look at the codon program for the amino acid called phenylalanine, we get the codons UUU, which is uracil, 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 plus UUC, which is uracil, uracil, cysteine. And those 2 together will combine to make this certain amino acid. So bringing it all back to Ogham, how does this amino acid stuff relate to trees? Well, it's very interesting because what I discovered in the research I was putting together for book 2, I went into the nitrogen cycle because I was exploring the neuroscience behind altered states of what is happening in the brain chemistry when we do certain breathing techniques. And, you know, a lot of this research, especially with raising the Christ oil within it, people are saying, oh, it activates DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is an amino acid. And I got on another tangent with it all because I discovered that the body can produce nitric acid and nitrous oxide, which is laughing gas. And the body produces nitrous oxide if there's basically too much ammonia in the body. So ammonia and nitrogen have a very interesting relationship with trees. And it all comes back to the digestion of protein, and what is DNA? It is made from protein. So when protein is digested in our human body, a byproduct of that as a waste product is ammonia. And then the ammonia that is produced, it gets processed by our liver, and then it is formed through the kidney filtration system into urea, and then that is formed into urine, and that urine is expelled out of us as a waste product. And so that waste product ends up going into the waterways and returning back to the earth. And the earth, through the interaction with the trees, converts the ammonia into nitric acid. It then starts evaporating. It turns into nitrous oxide, which is partly helping to form acid rain. And then all of that nitrogen byproducts, they fall back down into the earth and they're reprocessed by the trees. And then the trees actually start forming amino acids from the nitrogen and the ammonia as they chemically rearrange these elements. And then when the human eats the tree product or eats the animal that has eaten the tree, we then ingest amino acids to form DNA. So this is always coming back to Chinese medicine as, you know, we get our nutrients from food and we turn those nutrients into blood, and then that gets sent around through the bloodstream, delivering the nutrients to all parts of the body and all of the cells. So then it could be said in a very general sense that through the cross-correlation of amino acids coming from trees and possibly having a pattern match with the Ogham glyph script, and the Ogham being related to particular certain trees, then we're starting to form a potential system. And because language is such an important part of programming the water molecules through vibration, through cymatics, with intention, can we start to delve deeper into this theory? For example, if I say the Irish word for birch tree, bait, does that relate to an amino acid? And then if I put all of those words together in certain arrangements with correct pronunciation that I need to learn because I don't have any Irish linguistic background, but with the correct pronunciation at the correct pitch, maybe we can sing the song of the trees to program and heal the human body at the DNA level. So inspecting the Ogham chart again, with the fada or the feather, there's this extra knot and acme bit, and it has one of the glyphs in that is a line with two arrowheads facing each other at opposing ends of that line. And the way I'm interpreting this inside this theory of it relating to the amino acid genetic code is that when these DNA codons in groups of 3 get arranged together, there is always a stop codon and a start codon, basically signifying begin sequence, blah, 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 phenylalanine, UUC, whatever is in there, and then end sequence with the stop codon. So the way I see that line is that it has this, and also when we inspect the standing stones with the Ogham script written down from north to south, or maybe south to north, we can see that it's always written on this line with the arrows containing the program. So that's one aspect of the theory that I feel has some very interesting pathways to explore, and it does require, as I've said, people with expertise in those fields. So if you know anyone out there in the world that finds this curious enough to participate in, please share it with them, because we could be singing the song of the earth and helping our bodies, knowing exactly what we're doing, knowing that we're programming this to do that, and it could be so cool. So the next part of this obviously involves the Ogham stones. So these stones, standing stones, they're plugged into the earth. So this is the sword and the stone, the word and the tone. This is the Arthurian legend of Arthur's sword that gets put in the stone by Merlin, and that can only come out when the true king touches that, or vibrates with it, or resonates with that energy. So we've been gifted through mythology this kind of code that the resonance of the true heart is able to do these alchemical miracles. And as I've just said, the sword and the stone, if you take off the S from the sword and the S from the stone, you get the word and the tone. So this then brings us back to what I have just been discussing. So whether or not these, there's obviously the archetypal layer of the Ogham glyph script being corresponding to alphabetical letters. That's one aspect. But then we have these other aspects. So everything put upon each other, it doesn't mean that the alphabet is not the right way. It is, of course, right, because it responds to language, it's corresponding to language, but there's also a deeper level layer to this inspection. So on one level, the glyphs mean a letter of the alphabet used to construct words, but on one level, if we relate it back to the tree sound, it may relate to a certain lost language of mantra through the trees, tree language. And so this then brings us into light. So standing stones, as we know, cast shadows. When the sun rises in the east, peaks in the north, sets in the west, this is going to cast a shadow from the stone as a sundial that changes over the course of the day through the hours of the daylight, but it will also change its angle depending on the yearly rotational cycles. And when we track that for 1 year, the path of the sun will always show itself in a figure 8, which is called an analemma. So these Ogham stones definitely have a relationship with light. So if the Ogham glyphs relate to trees and the Ogham stones relate to the pathway of the sun or light, we can then inspect the correspondence or relationship between trees and light. So trees reach their branches up to the sky so that they can absorb sunlight, and they also absorb water and carbon dioxide, and they do all this to create oxygen and energy in the form of sugars. And these sugars are basically the nucleotide base pairs and the amino acids that we eat from the trees. So Ogham language, tree language, Ogham stones, light, sundial, sun casting devices, and the actual biological function of trees. They all seem to start having this tied in together relationship now. And it also got me thinking, as I was trying to develop this research, about the particular angle of the main acme of the Ogham. So we have the 4 groups, and each of those 4 groups has 5 line glyphs, and one group is pointing to the right, the other group is pointing to the left, the other group is pointing, it has a horizontal strike through the north to south polarity line, and then the last group has a strike through, but it is at an angle. And it got me thinking about the significance of this, especially when we think about Ogham stones, any standing stone. It is a pillar that is surrounded by the 4 directions. So if we then applied these 4 directions as the Ogham glyph alphabet, which direction is which around a 360-degree circuit? So we have 0 or 360, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and 270 degrees. Which of those 4 acme fits which position the best? So to help my brain unpack this, I created a diagram, and I just posted this diagram to a group of new friends on Telegram, on Ellen Delaney's channel, called Real History of Humanity, What Do You Know? And I'll put that link in the description below, because this is a wee group of Irish alchemists all joining together to share what we know. And I shared this diagram, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll just explain it, because I do need help with this, and everyone's got a piece of the puzzle, right? So to help my brain unlock these puzzle pieces, I love making diagrams. If you've seen any of my books, you will see that they're diagram full, because that is how alchemy is taught. It's taught through the language of symbol, because a symbol can contain many, many, many extrapolated layers within a simple glyph. For example, the circle with a cross in the middle, this is showing us the 4 seasons going around a cycle. It's showing us the wheel of time. It's showing us north, south, east, and west. It's showing us the DNA helix. If you look at it down from above, from the bird's eye view, the DNA helix looks like a cross, all this sort of stuff. So I've put a few different layers together. So you'll see in the center there's a wheel, and it's got guanine, uracil, cysteine, and alanine, G-U-C-A, apples and trees, or apples with the U, uracil, and cars in the garage. So that's the 4 base paired nucleotides, and that then would be possibly the 4 acme of the Ogham. And so this codon wheel, it basically starts fractalizing itself from the center to the perimeter, and it produces all of these arrangements of the 4 base pairs as their codons split into 3. We read 3 of those base pair 4 together to get an amino acid. And so around the very edge perimeter, we've got all the amino acids, and you can see with the red dots, you've got the stop amino acid, and then down on the southwest, you've got the green dot, and it's the start. And I'm still trying to understand this, but I'm just a very visual pattern person without the training in genetic code. So around the external perimeter of that codon wheel, I've put the 360-degree angular disc, And then there's the black circle behind that with the cross showing us the 4 directions. And then behind that there's the 12 divisions of the zodiac wheel going around. And then I've plugged in the winter and summer solstices and the autumn and spring equinoxes. And then on the smaller text, we've got the cross quarter days of Samhain, St. Bridget's Day in Bulk, Beltane, and Lugnasa. So this is the system of the Irish calendar in correspondence and harmony with the agricultural seasonal cycle. So then it was time to plug in the acme of the Ogham, and I did this through intuitive logic, if that is a thing, and because we've got 2 of those acme are paired in the sense that we have the straight lines going from the center of the stick to the left side or to the right side. So I've put those in the position of the winter and the summer solstices, because also of the angle going around the 360-degree circuit or cycle, because obviously at 0 and 360 there has been completion, and there at 180-degree there's a beginning and a completion, and then at the 180-degree opposite polarity position of that we have a middle division. So when the spring equinox is plugged in, 90 degrees as an angle does produce that 90-degree angular shape on that particular acme, when you can see that there's the north-south main line, and then the cross through strike, and then the angle of that is a 90-degree angle. So that's pretty logical, right? And then coming around to the autumn equinox at the 270-degree mark, this is logically where the more angled angle of light would fit into this diagram. So then as each Ogham glyph corresponds to a tree, I've written them here in English because I'm working from an English language. But in the winter solstice we can observe hawthorn, oak, holly, hazel and apple, and we go round and round to see all of the trees. And I did wonder which direction the winter solstice and the summer solstice should go in, as in, should, you know, if we divide these into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as hawthorn is number 1, oak is number 2, on we go, which way does it go? So if we're following the chart going from 0 to 90 to 180 to 270 to 360, we're following a clockwise direction, and therefore if we're using the acme in that same clockwise direction, we would go from the 1 to the 2 to the 3 to the 4 to the 5, click, and then we're into the 90-degree spring equinox, and we're into the next set of trees, and then on we go through there. So that's the logic and reasoning behind why I've put it in this way. And then I started to inspect, does it have any credibility, depending on the seasonal growth cycles of the trees that correspond to those seasons. So this is where it gets very interesting, because so all of the trees, the Ogham glyph script trees, have been put around a 360-degree angular circuit, and so trees reach their branches out to receive angles of light depending on the size of the tree, the age of the tree, and the growth cycle of the tree, the seasonal cycle. Different trees will be doing different things at different times of the year in different locations. So if we inspect on the spring equinox position, I've put it in red because U tree is quite important, because when we swap the Y to a J, we get the Jewish people, and Jesus, and then we could say, if we use that same letter swapping, the King of the Jews is the King of the U's, and Jesus is the King of the U tree, and he was reborn at Easter in spring. So it comes back into the Irish Bible coding again. So I'll just read what I have written in my notes. I've already mentioned the yew tree as the Jew tree, and the relationship with Jesus as the King of the Yews, as this tree is associated with immortality because of its poisonous and or cancer healing berries. It is also associated with immortality because it can live to 3,000 years old. When it reaches 900 years, it is considered ancient. An oak tree is ancient at 400 years. Another fact about yew trees is that the male flowers appear in February-March, a perfect match for this Ogham diagram. And then a quote from a website called woodlandtrust.org.uk. The association with immortality could have come about because of the evergreen foliage or because of the yew's amazing ability to renew itself. They can return to life from apparent decay. And so then another super amazing correspondence, if we look back in the same Acme to Gorse, and then we look into the DNA codon wheel and we find an amino acid called tryptophan. So tryptophan is basically the precursor to tryptamine. Tryptamine is one of the amino acid building blocks of dimethyltryptamine, which is DMT, which is responsible for altered states of consciousness if you ingest it, from an external resource. And we do produce DMT inside our body in small trace amounts. So DMT is associated with altered states of consciousness, and our bodies produce it naturally, and it comes from trees. So, inspecting gorse, I'm going to read what I've written. Gorse got me excited about it for the first time in my life. Gorse is prickly, and it always grows in the most annoying place on the bush track, and it grows too fast to clear. But in the context of Ogham and the previous diagram, it does flower from January to June, so it fits the plan. But a more interesting thing about gorse is that it is in the pea family of plant species Leguminosae, also known as Fabaceae, the same family that acacia comes from, the yellow flowered resource of DMT. So gorse is related to the acacia plant, and the acacia plant is where people get the DMT from to make the substance that people like to smoke. So without going around the whole chart, one reason is it's not finished, and the other reason is I'm sure you get the point, and I still need to do a lot more writing on this. But I will say what I've noted. I did checks on many more of the plants on this Ogham positioning to discover that 7 more I researched so far flowered or fruited in the appropriate season, such as apple harvesting occurring seasonally in winter. And as we can see up in that winter solstice, Acme, there is the apple. So that's about where I'm at with it all. And I will say one more thing about the correspondence between Ogham and amino acids, and the fact that amino acids form DNA helixes made from proteins, is that if we inspect an Ogham stone and we see that the glyphs are always written from top to bottom or bottom to top, creating a frequency. So if you know anything about how sound moves, you'll know that it moves in sine waves. Nature always moves in sine waves, or snakes. And if you look at any kind of Ogham stone, and you'll see that there's lines going this way, there's lines going that way, da da da, And if you drew a line from the left side and you went through one group, and then you crossed the midline, that north and south polarity line, and then you touch the tops of those glyphs, and you cross the midline, you touch the tops of the ones on the other side, and you snake back through and you touch the tops of the ones on the other side at those particular angles, it is creating a frequency waveform pattern. And so the sword and the stone, the word and the tone, with the assistance of light and the sun dial and everything plugged into the earth, this is showing us possibly that the ancient people who made these stones were toning the earth at certain nodal points or positions on ley lines to affect the energy flow or the meridian flow of the body of the land. Yeah, so that's one more interesting thing to factor into it all. These stones and this language seems to be multifaceted. And during this research for this Ogham addendum book theory that I'm putting together, I looked up this really great dowser that I knew of called Hamish Miller, who has since passed away. He's a geomancer from New Zealand, and he did a lot of work measuring the radiations of the standing stones, and he was able to visually display the changing patterns they made across the seasons. And he's got a couple of books published, and he did a great talk at the Megalithomania conference, which is on YouTube. And in a blog that I found by hedgedruid.co.uk, the author mentions a talk that they attended with dowsers, and Hamish Miller was there. And he spoke of an energy line called the Apollo-Athena line, which runs from Skellig Michael in southern Ireland to a place called Armageddon in Israel. And that's a whole other bit you can look up. Anyway, the author also passes on Hamish's experiences in New Zealand with a young Maori girl who had been taught the old ways and worked with energy lines, which she called song lines. And the Australian originals also call these song lines. And during her tuition, she had been taught songs to draw out the song lines, as the Maoris call the energy. The girl then visibly demonstrated her powers to Hamish's assembly of friends when she placed her stone onto a sacred site's center and sang energy into marvelous patterns of manifested earth energy. So it seems that these song lines have quite a literal purpose. The lines that make the grid earth with varying depths, length, and thicknesses are essentially acting as the meridian system of the earth, and then the standing stones are like acupuncture needles. And these Ogham stones are like acupuncture needles embedded with sine wave frequency patterns. So if you know anything about acupuncture, or if you've had an acupuncture experience, the practitioner will put the needle into the vortex called an acupuncture point to access the meridian flow energy, subtle energy of your electromagnetic body, and we will move that needle in particular ways. We'll either move it fastly or slowly, or we'll move it up and down, or we'll put it at a certain angle to follow the meridian in different directions. So taking that all into consideration, we can see that there's a lot of crossing overlaps between all of what I've mentioned, and it all does come back to the voice and the tone and the word and the stone. So that brings us to the end of the Ogham story research. And if you're interested in this and you've got some pieces of the puzzle you want to share, or if you know anyone else that does, please get in touch with me at anayascienceswitch.com. I'd love to collaborate and start meeting people who are into this kind of research. And if you want to have a look at my books, they're available online on my website as PDF copies, all about alchemy with lots of diagrams, teaching Chinese medicine, Taoism, all of the symbology that we use in those Eastern philosophies as tools for diagnostics, and anatomy, physiology, neuroscience, Bible codes, and how it all relates to Aire as the original Garden of Eden, as the blueprint for human inner alchemy. So that's what I've been working on for an entire year to get those all ready and prepared. One more book to go, should be out soon. And also what I offer on my website is bioresonance therapy using the voice. So that's very apt for the ending of this video, talking all about language and the voice being able to affect the DNA of our bodies. I use a technology that records the voice and turns it into a frequency pattern, and then compares that pattern to all of the frequency patterns I have in my library. Thousands and thousands of frequencies, from the frequency of vitamin C to the frequency of a particular thought or a hormone or a bone or a muscle. And yes, being the inquisitive science witch that I am, I have programmed into my bioresonance technology the frequencies of the Ogham in terms of their Irish and English tree names, with a symbol that looks similar to the Ogham glyph. And I've also got in there the 64 codons in various different ways, and I've got in there what I'm calling the Irish microcosmic orbit, which is the Neijing to and the points around the microcosmic orbit, but of Ireland. And it's very, very interesting, because even though it's just frequency, you can have direct noticeable effects on the physical body, such as very quick injury healing and skeletal alignment. All sorts of stuff has been happening with it. So yeah, have a look at that, and I wish you all a beautiful day, and I look forward to sharing more things from my alchemical science witch lab with you very soon. Bye.